If everyone could take their seats, we are going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Economic Development and Workforce Investment for the 2021 Interim. Co-Chair Schroeder and I would like to welcome all members and guests. We appreciate the patience of the committee members as we went through the process of rescheduling this meeting. The meeting was originally scheduled for last Thursday but was postponed in order to honor Representative Bam Carney. We also want to thank all of our presenters who rearranged schedules in order to be here today. I'm going to ask Sasha to call the roll. I ask each member, when you're answering the roll call, to indicate in their response whether they are here in my Frankfort office, or remotely. Sasha, would you please call the roll?
Senator Gardler, Senator Carr, Senator McDaniel.
Present in the 23rd District.
Thank you. Senator Mills.
Here remotely.
Thank you. Senator Southworth.
Here in the room.
Senator Storm.
Present remotely in the 21st District.
Thank you. Senator Thomas.
Here remotely.
Thank you. Senator Wheeler. Senator Wilson. Senator Yates.
Yes, I'm present from district here in Jefferson County.
Thank you. Representative Baker.
Remote from the district.
Thank you. Representative Banta.
Remote in the 63rd.
Thank you. Representative Beckler.
Here.
Representative Bojanowski.
I'm here in the room.
Representative Bray.
Present in the room.
Representative Brown.
Here in the room.
Representative Callaway.
Present in the room.
Representative Cantrell. Representative Elliott.
I'm present remotely.
Thank you. Representative Freeland.
I'm present remotely.
Thank you. Representative Gentry.
Present, 46th District.
Thank you. Representative Hart.
Present in the room.
Representative Huff.
Present in the room.
Representative Johnson.
Present in the room.
Representative King.
Present in the room.
Representative Kulkarni.
Present from the district.
Thank you. Representative Lawrence. Representative Lockett. Representative Rowland. Representative Sharp. Representative Sheldon.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Schroeder. Co-Chair Weber.
Present in the room. For those of you participating remotely, our committee staff is monitoring the chat function in the Zoom room. If you have any questions or want to make a comment, please indicate in the chat box if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. You can also let staff know that you are present in the chat box if we didn't get you during the roll call. If you are participating remotely, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. Would also like to note that meeting materials are available on the LRC website. A link was previously provided to all members. So we're going to jump right into business today. First item on our agenda, we will hear from the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers. I'd like to ask Lee Lingo and Melissa Aguilar Southard to please come forward. One more item that I missed, item number 2. I need a motion to approve the minutes. Second, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Minutes are passed. Now we move to item number 3. I want to ask each of you to introduce yourselves for the record, and after you've done so, you can begin your presentation to the committee.
My name is Lee Lingo. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers.
Melissa Aguilar Southard, Member Relations with the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers.
Thank you.
So we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity again this year to address this committee and speak to you about the importance and power of manufacturing in the state of Kentucky. So the first slide is some information at a glance about manufacturing here. We account for a little less than 18% of the total output in the state, employing 13.29% of the workforce. Total output's just under $40 billion. There's an estimated 4,500 or so manufacturing companies that operate within the Commonwealth. We're just shy of 245,000 workers here. We've exported this past year $24.4 billion, which is obviously down from previous years due to COVID. And $10.27 billion in exports was with our free trade agreement partners. CAM has been in existence since 2011, so we're here for the last pandemic. We have learned a few things, and a lot of things are new that we're all facing. Our mission as a trade association representing the manufacturing industry really is to advocate for our members, provide education and training opportunities, networking opportunities, and member benefits. We represent over 400 companies in the state of Kentucky. We currently have 3 industry-focused pillars, so 3 of the largest sectors in the state within manufacturing, the largest being automotive, second largest would be food and beverage. We have Chemical Industry Council as well as the aerospace sector. So some of our initiatives that CAM has been undergoing this in the past years, we do a wage and benefit survey annually to get a really good pulse on what pay rates are and what total compensation rates are within our industry. This is a valuable tool. It's not just useful for benchmarking and measuring what your neighbors might be offering down the street, but also gives you an opportunity to showcase what these rates are in a way that we hope will get youth interested in these kinds of jobs. We like to talk about the ability to aspire to acquire. Telling somebody what $50,000 a year is may not mean something to them, but if we can talk to them about things that they're interested in acquiring in life, sometimes that has a better resonating effect. We do business development and continuing education. We have a lot of strategic partnerships. Some of those are Kentucky Community and Technical College System, the World Trade Center Kentucky, and Advantage Kentucky Alliance. We build partnerships within communities and provide localized programming. Some of those programs have been done in conjunction with Bowling Green. Ron's here to speak with you later today. One of our series earlier this year was Manufacturing 411, in which we went to 8 different regions of the state and talked about the state of manufacturing and the pressures that are come to bear upon our industry. Now we're in the second quarter, we are working on a series of events called Land Forums, Linking Agriculture for Networking and Development with the Department of Agriculture, and really showcasing the softer side of manufacturing, food production, chemicals, and things of that nature. We work, as I mentioned, with KCTCS on a number of initiatives to connect technical students with manufacturers throughout the state. And we are partnering with another great organization in Kentucky, the Associated General Contractors of Kentucky, to bring the Be Pro, Be Proud mobile workshop here to our state. That will be here later this year, more information to come. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about supply chain. That's really the number 2 issue that our manufacturers have been facing. The challenges that we've had with our supply chain are really that it's outdated. So we have legacy technology, we use manual processes, and therefore we have a lot of inefficiencies. Next slide. So of those issues, the main challenge within the supply chain is transportation issues, and that's fairly broad. You hear a lot about the fact that there's a shortage of truck drivers. A good example of that was the gas shortage where North Carolina almost ran out of gas. We didn't not have gas. We had a hijacked pipeline, which first of all, most of us probably didn't think was possible, but then we didn't have drivers for the trucks to get the fuel to North Carolina. So there was a double break in that supply chain. That's a workforce challenge. We had gas price issues, getting that equipment to and from. We've got equipment shortages, lead times getting products here, and then failing domestic infrastructure, to name a few. Another one that we've heard a lot about here in Kentucky is the chip crisis. So we have Ford trucks parked all over the Commonwealth, and we're not alone. As a standard practice, most automobile dealers keep about a 90-day inventory on their new car lots. We're down for most manufacturing companies down to about 19 days. So if you've driven by a new car lot, what do you see a lot of? Used cars. And even those are, high value right now. And it's because we don't have the pieces and parts that we need to complete the production of those. So interesting piece, well, if you go back for a second, interesting piece on that particular slide is market was worth about $430 billion, and they were projecting a 7% increase, and demand grew 20 to 25%. So we were projected to be at $580 billion in that market between 23 and 24, and we're there now. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the pandemic pretty much forced everybody to work from home. So we're all using computerized technology that includes chips. They're in your phones, they're in just about everything anymore, and so there's a significant pressure on there. So I mentioned earlier, lots of OEMs are dealing with this. Ford's currently got about 110,000 trucks sitting waiting for semiconductor chips. Cherokee's got just under 100,000 from Jeep, and you can see Ford Escape, Edge, Jeep Compass, Explorer, Malibu. Those are just some. So another thing that's been talked quite a bit about for the last couple of years is reshoring or onshoring. And so there's been a significant amount of that talk and that movement, but one of the problems that has arisen is once you get here, you have to have people to do the jobs. And that's where we're falling short. I've talked to many companies who have brought operations back from the China and places afar, and they look to be in Kentucky, and they couldn't do it, so they've moved to Mexico. And that's problematic because we've got companies. This is the time that we have more than any other in the last several decades to get companies to set up shop and grow here and employ our folks, but we don't have folks to employ. So we'll talk a little bit about electric vehicle market too. In the past, there's been a number of things that were sort of hampering that particular growth, product maturity, limited charging infrastructure, range anxiety. Will my car get me to where I need to go? Currently, we're dealing with battery technology that is vastly improved. The market's validated somewhat in the Tesla effect. Most people know what a Tesla is now. And new OEMs and players are entering the market. So you've seen, GM and Ford in particular showcasing new vehicles. The future really is the cost competitiveness of that. When Tesla first came out, they were $70,000 minimum, going up to well over $120,000. But now we've got Ford talking about offering F-150s in the $40,000 range. So that makes it much more achievable for the average consumer. So just to kind of wrap up that particular piece, and I'd like to thank Die Central, which is one of our members, for helping prepare some of the supply chain data for us. We've got to have workers to do these jobs, and Melissa's going to talk a little bit about where we are and the pressures that we face in our workforce.
So I would ask, first of all of you know a business or multiple businesses that have help wanted signs in the window. I don't think we go into any business where you don't see that. We've seen businesses closed because they didn't have workers, especially maybe in the hospitality industry. And there are a lot of small manufacturers that are having similar issues, unfortunately. What I want to show you first is, if you look at the different the months, April of 2020 when COVID hit, you saw 88,000 claims come to the table. And then in November, of course, that dropped down to 6,600. And then now, May, we had 2,100. So we still are seeing unemployment claims. There are still companies that are taking breaks, so to speak, from operations because of the issues that Lee talked about. Some of the things that's very interesting for you to also understand is I just picked two counties. This is Marion County and McLaughlin County. So if you look at it in the very beginning in April, Marion County, for example, had about a 29% unemployment rate. McLaughlin County had 28%. And what's interesting is if you go on to the next date that I talked about, which was in November of last year, it fell from 4 and 13. So we saw significant issues, or some of the issues go away. And we saw significant decreases in the amount of unemployment. If you look at this year in May, we're right at 3.6 and 10.3, so we've still got some unemployment. But here's what's interesting is whenever you look at the data as related to the number of people in the workforce, and I wanted to actually go back to 2018, so that was pre-COVID, basically. what you were looking at is the amount of individuals, and this is an example coming from Jefferson County. December 2018, we had 399,000 people in the workforce. In 19, we had 402, and in December 20, we had 383. Every single one of these will show you that there's less people in the workforce, and when I say less, significantly less people looking for jobs and in the workforce than in 2018. And historically, we've continued to drop off workforce participation rate. But if you really look at the linear graph, you will see the line go up to increase and then drastically drop down. So that's something to really consider when we think about our employers and what issues we're having. There's a website on covidmoneytracker.org. If you aren't familiar with this, it tracks the spending, so to speak. And so when we look at the dollars that's pumped into the workforce, whether you think it's an incentive to work or an incentive to stay home, we have some differing opinions on that. You'll see that there's many dollars being spent on health insurance and internet access, unemployment benefits, all of our SNAP programs. A lot of people have elected to take Family Medical Leave Act at this point. To some degree, there's a mental health crisis from COVID that is being noted by employers. Just yesterday, I was on a call with Division of Rehabilitation Services out of University of Kentucky, and they were talking about the Retain grant, and they are actually working with individuals to get back into the workforce from mental health crisis. The gig economy is stronger now, but it's not as strong as what it was as well. And these were just, I went on and did a simple Google to look at all of the different incentives and pots of money out there that would help individuals who are staying home from COVID, aren't able to work, etc. There's many, many pots of funding out there. Workforce challenges, why are we not getting people back into the work? Well, when we talk to employers, basically, they're telling us that people are saying, why I should just stay home because I make more money, for example. They're saying, well, do I really want to go back because I've got used to staying home and working from home, so maybe I'll just find another job where I can work from home. The online job boards, there's a lot of perception out there, because if you go to an Indeed or a Monster or any of those types of job boards and you just do a quick search for what the jobs are, you're going to find a lot of jobs that are very entry level, entry wage, McDonald's, gas stations. So the perception may be that Melissa that logs on to Indeed, I may or may not think that I want that kind of job. A lot of people elected to go back to school on some type of online learning platform. And then there's the whole issue of childcare, and there's several things that I didn't even put on here, like transportation, for example. But quality childcare during second or third shift, those are some of the issues that we hear employers talk about daily. There's also the thought, when we talk about individuals not going back to work, is, there's the poverty guideline, which all of you are very well aware of. But when you look specifically, again, I just took Jefferson County. This would be a single parent, age 2, having 2 children, ages 3 and 6. Right now, just to have 0 left at the end of the month, you would need to make $24 an hour. And that's without any state assistance. I would need to make $24 an hour to have 0 left over at the end of the month if I lived in Jefferson County with 2 children. So there are some things like that you really need to take into account. Employers, we're trying to have those conversations with employers to understand as well. From a sustainability issue, another conversation that we normally have with employers, and employers come to us, and I'll just be very candid about it. They'll say, well, there's a lot of people who wants to sit home and receive benefits and not work. What's interesting, again, is from a sustainability standpoint, when you look at the progression of individuals earning dollars from a job, for every red dot you see, they will lose a benefit. So think about it this way. So if I'm making $18,000 a year, I've already lost 3 benefits. If I make $36,000 a year, I've already lost 3 benefits. And remember, I need to make it $24 to break even. So what that means in Jefferson County, for example, is that we're at about $49,000 that I have to make to be able to break even. And then I wouldn't, it'd be clear sailing from that point forward. And so, when you take all the variables into effect, the transportation challenges that some of us have, especially in rural counties, you look at the birth rate ratio, which is decreasing. You look at technology, which a lot of individuals feel like that's taking jobs, and I don't know if I want to go into an IT type of career, et cetera. You look at our aging population, quality childcare, our kindergarten readiness. We have about 60% of our kids, at least in most counties, that are not ready for kindergarten when they go into kindergarten, which means that they may be behind as they go throughout school for K through 12. And then COVID came along, everything kind of changed. The scenario of work at home kind of changed. And then, thinking about higher education as well. Then there's all the dollars that individuals are getting in their pockets that they didn't get before. So all of that pretty basically makes it a very different scenario for the workforce today. I did a little research on employer incentives. We have employers that are offering major bonuses to come to work, to stay at work. If they do lay them off, then they offer them a bonus to come back and stay for another 90 days. There's the flexibility of working from home if that's possible. We have a lot of employers that have done a wage analysis from their wage and benefit analysis to see what kind of wages they should be paying versus what everyone around them is paying. So they've increased their wage packages. The instant pay, I can't even imagine this, but I go to work in one day and I get paid for that day. And if I show up the second day, I get paid for that day too. So the instant pay option is also out there and floating around. There's employers that are offering extra vacation days if you stay. So there's a lot of different incentives. The technology piece is here and it's not going to go away, but there's a lot of different incentives here that you have to think about. And so what it really comes down to are employers have to be really innovative. They have to be very creative. They have to be very inspiring. They have to change the culture that people are working in so that they feel like it's inclusive, as well as, a place that they want to be for a while. And also remember, our career changers, they change 7 to 9 times by the age that they're 40. So how many times have you changed careers versus me being 40 years old and I've already changed multiple times, up to 9 potentially?
So we'll talk a little bit now about our public policy priorities. We support policies allowing for advanced recycling. It's the process in which manufacturers convert post-use plastics into valuable fuels, petroleum products, and chemical feedstock. Re-examining the state's current gasoline tax to help fund critical infrastructure needs. Modernizing Kentucky's tax structure without placing additional undue burdens on job creators. As well as policies promoting workplace safety, employee engagement, and second chances for those re-entering the workforce. To kind of wrap up, the 3 biggest things that manufacturers are facing these days are workforce, supply chain, and the regulatory environment in which we operate. Obviously, there were some unusual pressures over the last 18 months from a regulatory perspective. Manufacturers, we adapt. That's what we do. We follow rules. That's what we do. The workforce challenge, we are trying to engineer our way through this as much as we can, but you can only do so much. And, back in the 80s, there was all this talk about the robots taking our jobs. That's not really the case. The robots are doing the jobs that we can't find people to do, and you can only automate so much. And so that brings us to the second really critical break in the supply chain, which is we can make things. Well, let me back up even further. How many people on this panel bought something this week? Okay, thank you. We make those. How many people ate this week? Thank you. We processed your food too. Every time you buy something, something has to get made. A box has to get created to ship it in. A truck has to be built to drive it. A driver has to get in the vehicle and drive it to deliver it to wherever it is that's being delivered. We cannot automate the driver process. There's all this talk about, automated cars and full autonomy, but we're a long way off from fully autonomous 18-wheel traffic. And you can't deliver everything on a train. You still have to get it to a store. You still have to get it to your door. So when you think about that, we have very significant limitations that we're trying to work with. And as Melissa mentioned, if we have less people that are engaged in the workforce year over year, we've got to figure out a solution to this. We've all got to look at this sort of ball of knots and pick a string and start unknotting it. There is no one solution. There's no one significant problem that has caused all the other problems. It is a layering of all of those. The extra payments per week is not the singular thing that has put everybody over the edge. It has on some cases, but not all cases. How long the duration of which somebody can be on unemployment, or how much we're paying for unemployment, that's significant. The access and cost and ease of ability to get extra training and skills is another challenge. So it's a wide variety of these things, but we have to tackle them all. Ron's going to give you a presentation that really delves into this, which is wonderful. But we wanted to share with you that, as manufacturers, most people think of assembly and stamping. It's sort of that automated process, and there's a lot of banging, but your food comes from us. Your power comes from us. If you keep ordering at the rate that you're ordering, we're already at pre-pandemic production levels, but we're at 60% of our pre-pandemic employee participation levels. So we have figured out a way to make the stuff as fast as you all are ordering it, which is great. There's going to be a point where we can't do that anymore. We've got to have people in these jobs. And as the economy continues to grow, we continue to order more things, eat out more often, use more power. That all requires more people. So you can see how this is growing at a rate that delta is growing, and it's not in a good way. So we've got to figure this out. We have great people like yourselves that are doing a wonderful civic duty to help in that, and we trust that you'll be able to work with us to try to find solutions to this, because we make the food, Taco Bell sells it. We make the cars, dealerships sell it. We help make hotel parts that make a hotel. People can stay the night in a nice Hilton or Hyatt. We've got to make sure that we have all these things in continuation. So thank you very much for your time. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. And we do have some questions. First, we'll start off with Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this was a very interesting presentation in many ways, because I think it does hit upon some of the issues that we face, in a modern American economy. Particularly, with the supply chain being dependent on foreign countries. I mean, I think it's a fair statement to probably at least up until the early 90s, when we started signing all these trade deals, which was a relatively bipartisan agreement to outsource certain industries in the United States of America to foreign countries. We were relatively autarkic and self-sufficient as far as our manufacturing capabilities in the United States of America. And, I think that it was shown twice in the last century, when we were the arsenal of democracy in both World War I and World War II, especially with the increased dependence on, foreign markets, which are somewhat adversarial for microchips and everything like that. It really does call into account, in my opinion, national security concerns about whether or not, if we did get into a relatively large adversary, whether we would be able to meet our demands. So I guess this leads me kind of into my question. You said that some microchip manufacturers about reshoring have looked at places in the United States, and even in Kentucky in particular, and we've not been able to meet their needs, and they've gone to Mexico. I mean, I find that relatively hard to believe that they can't find American workers that can do these types of jobs. Given that, for all our educational system's problems, we still, I think, have a education system that's probably worlds better than that down in some of these second and third world countries where these things are being produced. So why is that these items can't be produced in the United States of America?
So I may have misspoke in that it wasn't specifically chip manufacturers that are coming, it's just all manufacturing in general. I know that there are some chip manufacturers in the U.S., but the vast majority of them are in Asian countries. That's just where they've settled. It's just like China has a disproportionate amount of our PPE production, and we obviously experience that. That's very low tech. There's no reason why, our safety masks only have to be made in China. And so that was something that we brought back, and we did it fairly quickly. And when the pandemic first hit, the National Association of Manufacturers did a lot of legwork with the states to find manufacturers who had the ability to make certain things, and we sort of cobbled that together. And that will continue. And you're starting to see where, from your perspective, and actually your point's very on topic, the national security perspective of certain things like chips and medical devices, medicines, certain alloy production is starting to come back here. When I was speaking of, in particular, though, I've spoken with some manufacturing entities that have brought back production from China, and they couldn't find the workers here. They couldn't even find workers to fill the jobs that they already have their existing facilities. So to bring back, all new lines, they didn't have the ability to do it, and that goes back to the participation rate.
If I can be permitted a brief follow-up, is that due to perhaps too comfortable a benefit system, or what, or just the wages, or a combination of both? Because I can think that my great uncle, supported a family working in a shoe factory and had insurance and benefits, and
Sure.
That was something that was very common in the United States of America, that somebody could work in a factory, at a job, and have a good middle-class living. And nowadays, it just seems like it's a race to the top for profits at the top, while the wages at the bottom are not quite, we started to see some worker wages increase during the past administration. Hopefully, then COVID-19 came along and things kind of got off track. But, what can we do to get wages up in the economy to allow people to raise a family?
Our wage and benefit, one of the values of it is it tells us sort of where the pulse is, and the average wage in manufacturing, as Melissa was talking about in Jefferson County, the average wage in manufacturing, generally speaking, is right at that line where you can leave government assistance and begin wealth creation. So it's to your point about, entering that middle class and moving up, whatever that looks like to that individual. But we can't push people to make that decision. We can lead them there. We can show them, here's the ceiling and here's the trap door. I'll even open it for you. You can stick your head out and take a look around. But the challenge really is not that we don't have the wages, or we don't have this, or we don't have that. We don't have enough people doing these jobs across all sectors, not just manufacturing. When Taco Bell can't be open on Tuesday because people didn't come in, is a problem. And that jams up my folks who are making whatever. And Chick-fil-A ran out of sauce. Who would have ever thought we'd have a sauce shortage? I meant to bring that as a prop.
Arby's in Lexington the other night, and they were out of roast beef. I was so
right.
I get it.
So, the answer to your question really isn't so much a singular thing. It's a bunch of things that we've got to start unpacking. I think the wages, generally speaking, are there, especially in our sector. But there are other things that are keeping people from just being in the workforce. And if we can get them into jobs, any job, we can show them the path to come into manufacturing and processing, in our chemical industry or an automotive industry, and they can start to earn their way up and actually generate wealth, which is what we want as Kentuckians. We want people to be prosperous. They pay taxes when they're prosperous, right? But we've got to get them into the job first. And so there's a whole bunch of different things that really affect that.
Representative Bray.
Great presentation. Just real quick question. I've seen the help wanted signs all across my area. The hospitals, my local hospitals called me because they're in dire straits for, needing employees. What do you all think the impact on the extra federal unemployment benefit is? And have you noticed a difference in our neighboring states who have turned that away?
So there was actually an article that was published in USA Today this morning. So I just read it briefly, but a basic recounting is that we haven't yet been able to determine if the states who have cut that off, how much of a difference it makes. Just like it's not a difference across 100% of this problem is a piece of that problem. Clearly, for some folks, it's enough to keep them at home. I have spoken with several manufacturers, and in fact, some that the wages of the individuals that we were discussing were $70,000+ a year. And those individuals this spring did the math, and they figured out what the stimulus payments were, what the weekly payments were. They were reading the tea leaves on the child tax credit, which is basically just paying you ahead, and they figured they could take the summer off, and so they did. They weren't making more than $70,000, but they were going to be comfortable enough, and they knew that this problem would be severe enough that there would be no workers, because there already weren't workers, that their job would be safe. And so they told this particular employer, we'll come back in the fall and help you out. Well, that doesn't really help us, in the meantime, because we need the things that you produce, because they go into other things in the input. So I wish I could give you a straight answer on that. I'm not trying to be cagey. It's just, it's not the only thing, but it's as we were talking about, it's one of those strings that we've got to start unknotting and figuring out what that looks like in conjunction with unemployment duration, the amount we pay, access to training, childcare, which was a huge, that childcare alone really, the lack of it when the COVID really took shape, decimated, the women in the workforce. They were the primary individuals that went home. And I don't know if you saw the one slide, but it was disproportionately high. We're going to be 30 years rebuilding that back. In 2019, I think was the first year that women outnumbered men in the workforce by 1%, but they were there, and then somebody had to stay home with the kids. And if you're making that decision, I don't know what drives it, if it's, traditional gender roles or who makes more or whatever the reason was, disproportionately more women stayed home. And so if you're looking at that, is it, all right, do we have universal pre-K? Is there on-site or near-site childcare? Is that an employer burden? Is that a co-op of employers? There's a whole bunch of things that we've got to figure out, but the net is we've got to give people we've got to limit any hurdles and roadblocks to get people back to work, whatever we have the ability to do, and not necessarily through a regulatory. We don't need the government pushing this, but we need the government to help work with us to figure out what that looks like.
And a quick follow-up. So the governor, as we all know, had offered an incentive for people to return to the workforce. From your all's perspective, have you seen an appreciable difference in employment levels?
No. That wasn't enough there was no incentive there.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you. So, kind of in follow-up to Rep. Bray, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a survey in May, and we've had lots of discussions with this body about the $300 extra, and in their survey, they found that only 16% of the unemployed workers were actively not looking for employment because of that additional pay. So, I think that as a topic is blown out of perspective relative to these numbers. But they also found that childcare was a reason for 24%. A lack of available jobs in sectors that were still suffering was 28%. COVID-19 concerns for 26% of the respondents. And then the one I want to ask kind of a question on is 23% said they lack the skills or experience necessary for most jobs right now. Could you speak on what kind of skills or experience that you feel like we need to develop? I'm a teacher, so I think about it from a K through 12, K through 16 perspective. What skills or experience are people lacking?
Yeah, so every employer, it's a great question, because every employer that we talk to us about that exact subject. And it's not normally, it's not the degree programs, although we still do need engineers and we need operations directors, but it's the teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, all those skills that, you get through experience, quite frankly, and you usually get it through maturity as well. Those are the things that's lacking in the workforce. And that's not just entry level, that's, entry level all the way up through operations. The more experience you have, the more problem solving you can do. For entry level positions, though, that are paying the average of $19 to $22 an hour, you have to still have those skills. And so we've seen a lot of classrooms, a lot of schools, they have started working with work-based learning activities. So for example, in your 10th, 11th, 12th grade. They have the track apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship program in the schools. We have Kentucky Fame that they're working through. And then there's a lot of co-op programs. KDE, there for a little while, year before last, was quoting that only about 10% of students actually were in work-based learning activities, which meant that they were earning and learning at the same time. So textbook met real world, basically, is what that meant. And what's interesting is in the healthcare field, you have clinicals, right? You go through CNA experience, you have to spend some time with the patient. There's really no difference in manufacturing. If you're welding, you really should spend some more time with an employer learning those skills and what you just learned in the textbook world. So again, that helps with those soft skills, essential skills, whatever you want to call them.
I would add on to that too that I think we're transitioning into a world where the sort of the old methodology of education, where you go through 12 years of education, potentially more, in one block of time without that opportunity. The apprenticeship has been around, but we've sort of got away from it for a long time. But if you look at, again, manufacturing sort of leads the way in a lot of ways. Just-in-time learning is really a concept that we need to embrace. So as you're on the job and you're looking around from your position on that job and you're thinking, I kind of like what you do, I'm interested in that. I can go and get skilled up or credentialed fairly quickly and fairly efficiently and fairly cost-effectively into that role. And then when I'm in that role, I can be looking around and think, you know what, that next one up there, that looks interesting. And it doesn't have to be in a vertical, and it doesn't have to be in a horizontal. It can be, diagonal. You can pretty much go any way that you want to. But in the past, we go to school for 4 or 5 extra years of college to do this, and how many of us actually do that for a living? And that's not disparaging, colleges at all, because they still provide the skills and that training and that upper echelon that we have to have. But, how we go about getting that education and how we just sort of separate that in our life is maybe something we need to be looking at differently. And that's why, KCTCS is a pretty good partner for us. They're able to, get people into jobs, as quickly as 6 weeks in many cases. And we need them in 0 weeks. So, 6 weeks is better than 4 years for somebody to make that decision.
Could I just follow up very quickly?
Please.
So I'm very grateful that you mentioned critical thinking, because I think that that's something that we need to discuss in every meeting, is that our students do. Just a quick follow-up from what you said. So are we more likely than now, maybe than ever, to have like on-the-job training opportunities as opposed to the kind of traditional go to college or go to a trade school and train and then go into a position?
So I'm going to speak very candidly at this point. You're laughing, Ron. So here's the issue. There's so little in the workforce that employers have dropped their standard and the bar for who they hire, that at this point they have to train them on the job. And so not to say that they weren't training them before, but they are critically training them now, to the point that I want you to come leave today at 9 o'clock. I want you to be here at 9 o'clock. If you show up at 9 o'clock, at 9:15, I'm going to give you your hard hat, your boots, whatever it takes. I'm going to take you and put you with Melissa, and she's going to show you the ropes for the next 3 months. So that is OJT at its best. There are a lot of incentive programs out there that work with employers. They'll pay partial wages. There's incentive programs out there like that, but the employers don't even know about those, and they're still willing to train on the job as much as they possibly can.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm continuing a line of thought here. So my question following theirs is there any indication that we're doing enough, or that we're winning, or are we still on the downslope with the hope that we're going to bottom out and start back up in the near future, or where are we in the process?
We are not winning.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Ron will delve into that further, but the rate at which that delta is growing from production and what we are making and producing to the amount of people that are in the workforce is widening. It's not shrinking. And so that's, kind of back to that point about whether it's the $300 or it's any number of other factors, it's all the factors. And so as a state, where does Kentucky rank compared to our other peer states, in the Southeast or other states that we endeavor to benchmark against for certain sectors? And we've got to figure out, okay, what can we do reasonably efficiently and very quickly to where we can start to create some parity. And I'm not talking about necessarily bringing workers in from other states and encouraging them that way, but let's get the people that are sitting on the sidelines back in the game. And, everybody's got a different incentive to work. Some people like to move up and create new things. Other people like the paycheck. Who knows what those reasons are, but we've got to start dissecting those, and we've also got to figure out what those roadblocks are. I wish I had a rosy, opinion, or be able to foretell that, but,
Just to add on, how many we're hiring signs have been taken down in the last several months? None. And I would venture to say that there'll be more that go up rather than come down.
Okay, thank you. One more quick question, if I could. Yes. You hit on the workforce participation rate going down, obviously, and yet unemployment is going down. Those two statistics don't seem to correlate in my brain. Educate me. Why are both of them going down? If I just don't see what's going on there.
So there's a numerator there and there's a denominator. And when you have less people looking for work, it makes a smaller number of individuals that go into the denominator. And it's really that simple. And I say that from an educated standpoint because about a year ago, I actually asked that exact question when I held a state position here. I didn't understand it either, and that's exactly what they told me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. We've got 5 folks in the queue. We're going to get to those. I ask that you keep your questions brief and succinct. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to circle back to childcare for just a moment, please. Recently, Renee Shaw with our beloved KET had a wonderful interview with one of our major hospital groups here in Kentucky that offers either on-site or near-site, I think she referred to it, childcare. The question running through my head during that interview was, so the employee still pays for childcare, I think. I could be mistaken, but at least it's quality childcare that the employee can rely on. It was one of your slides. Do we have an estimation of how many employers, manufacturers, and the business community here in Kentucky that are able to offer that? I know the mega employers do, but I would really like to see some of the smaller employers, even if they had to network with some of their even competitors to offer that. I'm thinking that might be able to get some of the more females workers back into the workforce. Just wondering if you had additional thoughts about that.
So I can tell you that last year, Lincoln Trail area was working on that exact issue. They were trying to figure out how many quality daycare providers they had versus how many they actually needed. And I'm sure Ron's area has worked on this as well. And the number was so low that they actually put a consortium of employers together to try to begin to have daycare on site or at least at a facility in an industrial park that would help that cause.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was very interested to hear what you all had to say. I would like a hard copy. If you could send it to my office. I think it's a lot of things that are occurring in our economy and in the economy that is, and I don't think we can continue based on what was in your presentation. I especially like the dots going up at a place where you break even and how much money you have to make. And there's some sectors that think that $48,000, say in urban Jefferson County, is unreachable for folk. The workforce participation, and I see that as problematic, and we've got people that are in our society that have that scarlet letter on their forehead for felons, ex-felons that come out of incarceration that have served their sentences and paid all restitution, but there's no room for them in the end. And you know what you're saying in terms of manufacturing. I tell young folk that tell me that, well, nobody will harm me, and I ask the question: can you make something? Can you fix something? Can you build something? Mm-hmm. And you know, the OJT perspective, on the job training, and the opportunities for folk to get skills. It is a catch-22 that the situation is what it is, but it's kind of the situation that we put ourselves in before COVID. Am I making sense with that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So where are we in terms of moving and doing things differently? And we have the Bluegrass Bowling Green Area Chamber of Commerce coming up in a minute, and same question will go to them. But that is, I mean, the Chamber of Commerce says that we can't find the workforce. Workforce participation is a part of your presentation, and I thought that was just extremely interesting. That I live in the inner core and in the urban area in Fayette County, and we have a problem that young folk are killing folk, and there's a gang problem, and how do we fix that? I mean, because what affects Jefferson County, what affects Fayette County will ultimately affect all of Kentucky. So do you have any ideas about how the matrix, the numerator, and the denominator, and how that works as to how we can address those things across our state?
So I can get on a big, long soapbox on this, but I will not. My first thought is start early. You cannot wait till 9th grade to say, hey, Lee, what do you want to be when you grow up? Pick a career pathway. We can't do that. We have to begin thinking in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, and especially by 3rd or 4th grade. At 3rd or 4th grade level, you really start thinking about, I'd like to be a teacher, or I'd like to be whatever is comfortable, and they know that's what they begin to think about. So we absolutely have to start early. And I still don't think that there's enough programs out there to teach parents how to parent, not telling them how to parent, but teaching them the basics of parenting. I think that we could do a much better job with that as well. Even in the high schools, we have parents in high schools as students. And so how are we working with those students on parenting and making good choices? So there's a lot of soft skills that need to be built into the K-12 system as well. And then, you know, my other thought is mentoring. We need a lot more mentors out there. There's a lot of students out there, young students and even young adults, that if I had Lee 30 years ago, he could have enticed me to think in a different way, which would have had a different experience. So we need a lot more mentors in the school system paired up with children as well.
We just one more thing, if I may, Mr. Chair. That we've got generational things that are happening now, and we've got some young people that are in their 20s, or 30s, and even 40s, maybe 50s, that have something to contribute, and haven't been allowed to contribute it, and you know, they're way past preschool, kindergarten, and high school. But how do we make those people useful members of society?
Go through your churches, go through community-based organizations, go to your neighbor, go have dinner with somebody you didn't have dinner with yesterday. I mean, this isn't a problem that employers have to fix or the government has to fix. We have to fix this ourselves. And the more I think we encourage each other to do that very thing of what you're talking about, whether they're 30, 40, or 50, that's what we have to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just as a reminder to the members of the committee, you can find the presentation and all meeting materials are online, so those have been uploaded. I just want everyone to know that those are available. Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've been sitting here trying to think about how I can keep my comments concise. This committee is often very perplexing for me. I am from Eastern Kentucky, and when you talk about people who are left on the sidelines, those are our workers. I sit here and I listen to people say, we have no workforce, we have no skilled workforce. Well, in Eastern Kentucky, we have the workforce, but our people are starving for job opportunities. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening. When I sit here and listen to you talk about worker skills that are needed in safety, welding, mechanics, problem solving. Our coal miners, we're skilled in those types of areas. Now, we recently opened a prison in Eastern Kentucky, which was actually in my district. And in the beginning, the commissioner said, Ashley, we really need this to happen in Eastern Kentucky. I can't find people to work in corrections in other areas of the state because they have better jobs to work rather than a state grade job that is hazardous duty. And when they brought that, when the prison opened, they said they predicted 200 jobs. We had over 1,000 applicants for 200 jobs. We're upwards of 240 jobs at this point, and they're thinking they're going to have 260 jobs. Like I said, our folks are starving for good job opportunities because when you talk about coal miners, it's very difficult when you go to a job. Senator Wheeler can probably also testify to this. He and I started at the same job on the same day in Eastern Kentucky as attorneys at the same law firm. And I'm certain most of the coal miners made a lot more than we did on the first day that we started our job opportunity, our job. So it's very difficult to ask those skilled miners to, on the family budget that they've established, to go work at a lower paying wage. What we see happening is we see people who have inherited homes, nice, comfortable homes. They have family roots planted there where they have help with childcare. They don't always have to pay for childcare. So they can't afford to move to Georgetown to work at Toyota. So what they do, they drive. And as they get older or as they get injured, that drive becomes harder, and that transfer ultimately becomes unsuccessful. So one of the things that I often say in this economic development committee is, how do we bring the jobs to Eastern Kentucky? And I'm really, really excited that you mentioned transportation earlier, because just yesterday at my daughter's basketball practice, I was speaking with a lady. We have a Kellogg's plant in Eastern Kentucky, and it's only one. I learned yesterday it's one of 4 in the world. And she said that, it's a very successful plant, but their biggest cost is transportation. And so would it be a good investment to maybe invest in rail and air or other type of transportation, improving our roads in Eastern Kentucky in order to try to, because for instance, I also spoke with someone at Ford who said, Ashley, we're waiting on things, just like what you're talking about, the chips. If you could bring a tier 1, tier 2 plant to Eastern Kentucky and they could supply our headlights or they could supply our seats that we put into our vehicles that we make, that's Eastern Kentucky helping other businesses in Central Kentucky profit and all across the state. So that's utilizing, the skilled workforce and the labor that we have all across the state. So I just would like to know your thoughts on how we can invest in maybe transportation or in order to expand some of these opportunities to our skilled workforce in Eastern Kentucky.
I'll come at that from the side a little bit. When we did our Manufacturing 411 series, the 8 locations we stopped at were in conjunction with KCTCS campuses. And Melissa did some great research in each of these areas that we went to, and we pulled what basically the students were interested in and the skills and training they were getting. And what was interesting, in some communities in Eastern Kentucky, we've got a significant number of people who were interested in welding, and yet there weren't welding jobs. But then there are communities like Ron's where they've got a need for welders and there's not enough welders. So some of this is a logistical problem, right? And I don't know how it will ultimately sort out, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that if we are not able to get folks in Eastern Kentucky to leave Eastern Kentucky, and I'm not advocating that, I'm just saying, that's, again, the travel to job sort of concept, then maybe there's more opportunities for us to set up localized supply chains, as you mentioned, where, okay, we've got extra people who are interested in welding and can skill up even more in this area, and maybe more of that work goes there and then gets trucked. And if you get enough over time businesses that are willing to do that, that does prop up a region, it props up a community, and that drives the money that would be put into transportation and roads and things. If you've got more reasons to be there, the cost of getting to and fro is less of a burden to a manufacturer. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at that, but what was really interesting to us is that, communities don't always have the output of the type of worker that the business community needs. And so you can try to steer that as much as you can, but sometimes you just got to look around and say, okay, is there a neighboring community that can put that, that product out, that educated and skilled individual, that we can utilize that, and it won't be where we are, but it'll be close. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it would be, in state, which is, better than Mexico. So.
Thank you. Representative Beckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick as you would ask me to be. Question and then a comment. Were there specific occupational skills or I'll say occupations or skills shortages before the pandemic, and have those shortages stayed relatively constant?
There were shortages. Some of them are the same, absolutely. I'd say we have additional shortages now than what we had before.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what the shortages were before?
Welders was a shortage in certain areas. It depends on the area of the state that you're talking about. CNC operators, entry level. Just yesterday, we had a controls engineer. They've been looking for a controls engineer for 3 years. Can't find one. I met with one of the chemical companies in Louisville a couple of weeks ago. It took them 1.5 years to find a chemical engineer that could come in. And then from an entry-level standpoint, the majority of the entry-level positions there was a shortage pre-COVID, but there's an additional shortage now for entry-level positions.
Okay, thank you. And my comment is for you, Ms. Southard. I disagree with your assessment that we have to start our third and fourth graders on a path toward a career. I think oftentimes at 18 years old, it's too early to ask them. I think the third and fourth graders ought to be able to explore, and they'll change their minds a number of times. It's kind of like trying to make a young boy a football player at third grade. Just doesn't work. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. I think it's been very informative, very good. I think you gave us a lot of good information, and I appreciate it. I think by the activity on the committee, we did as well. So appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Our next item on the agenda, I'd like to ask Ron Bunch, President and CEO of the Bowling Green Area Chamber of Commerce, to come forward. Ron, if you'll begin by introducing yourself, and then after you can jump right into your presentation.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the committee for the work that you all do in supporting economic development and your interest in talent. I think those two things are obviously critical for our Commonwealth. I'm Ron Bunch, President and CEO of the Bowling Green Area Chamber of Commerce. I've also been meeting with the larger economic development organizations in the state for some time now. Louisville, Lexington, Northern Kentucky, Owensboro, and Bowling Green have been meeting to discuss. So what I'm going to share today is a reflection of our conversations, and I am also past chair of KAED, our professional association, and I am also one of only a handful of certified economic developers in Kentucky that are practicing. So there's some expertise, at least, that comes with my comments. But thank you so very much for the committee's work. And I really have two recommendations. So mine is going to be more of a recommendation type scenario than coverage of the backdrop. I think what Cam has presented is very helpful. What I'd like to present is some options on how to address the situation that we're in. I've done economic development for almost 30 years now. This is my 6th leadership position for state. I've been in Bowling Green, Kentucky for 11 years now. We've been very fortunate to land over 130 projects, over $3 billion in economic development, and over 7,400 new jobs. We've been the site for 3 of the #1 projects in Kentucky. And I share that not to boast, but just as to say, we're very interested and very committed on keeping Kentucky on the forefront. And my comments are along those lines. I mean, what I would like to suggest to the committee is, what if Kentucky set out to be a leader in talent development? How might that shape how we looked at these issues and how we then acted to build systems where economic development partners with business, partners with government, and partners with citizens? And in that line of thinking, my first recommendation, I have a handout for that I provided. It's simply the rankings report. So like most things, you have a publication that's respected in the field. This is one of those publications. As they analyze workforce development programs in states for 10 years in a row, they, not I, have identified Louisiana's program as the #1 program in the country. Now, Louisiana made a decision to lead in that, and they created the program a little later in the game than some states. And what they did was set it up, and then they went and hired the #1 person that was running the program that was #1 the year before. So like you go and find a great coach, you create the great program, hire the great coach, and now here you see 10 years of being #1. So suggestion #1 would be to create a program like this, but better in Kentucky. Well, why does that matter? Because this is a simple commitment that they make. And South Carolina was the first to do it, and that's where I got my career start. They simply commit to targeted businesses. So these are businesses that qualify for incentives. And we as a Commonwealth provide incentives because they have a multiplier effect for those kinds of companies. So they'll help create another 2.5 jobs in our economy, and they generally provide better wages and are important for the supply chain that Cam presented. And most of them in Kentucky are manufacturers, but it does include others. Their simple commitment is this: for you all that qualify, whether you're an existing company or new, we will recruit, we will screen, and we will train your workforce for you. So we, as a Commonwealth, would take that on, and we would set that up inside the Cabinet for Economic Development. So it comes from a business development perspective versus potentially more of a bureaucratic perspective, let's say. So you have a sales staff. That sales staff is chasing, closing, and winning projects. What if they had this tool like these other states to make that commitment? So that's the first recommendation: to address the current term problem, create this new program, set out to become #1 of the states in leading with talent in the Commonwealth, set out that competitive advantage. It's better for our companies and it's better for Kentuckians, and frankly, it'll grow the budget because the return on investment for those investments in talent development, one, it'll be a research and development function because as you win new projects, you'll develop new curriculum that you can then share both through K-12 and with our KCTCS system. Secondly, you'll have a single point of contact, maybe for the first time ever in the Commonwealth, to really share with you all the challenges there are in recruiting candidates. Because right now you have to aggregate a conversation. So you might talk to the 100 companies in Bowling Green and get 100 different perspectives on how it is to recruit people. Well, if you have a singular business development function in the Cabinet for Economic Development, you'll hear from a leader there the challenges that are happening in each of the regions and what positions they're having challenge filling. Then we as a Commonwealth can use that informed opinion to then improve our systems. So I think Louisiana started out with maybe $10 million, not a lot of money. So again, I don't have a specific piece of legislation, but how do we look at what they've done, make it better for Kentucky, develop a competitive advantage, then go hire the person who would be the rock star to then run it for us to take care of our companies and our Kentuckians. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation is a little more cumbersome, but so let me step back for a moment before I talk about that. In the materials I provided to the committee was some data from a retreat that we had for the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and I'm a ex officio member of that board since I've been here. And then it's a talent report that was provided in 2015, and I was one of the members of that group that put that talent report together. And what I want to talk about for a moment is that system. And so I hear a lot of conversation about the supplemental money. Hear a lot of conversation about employers need to increase wages, employers need to do more training, employers need to do this, need to do that. That study at the time highlighted that less than 10% of our employers in Kentucky felt like their workforce had the skills that they needed. Less than 10%. And at the time, I think the number was Kentucky was investing almost $1 billion annually in various workforce programs that produced that outcome. So at that time, too, we looked at some other factors. One of those factors is in a handout that I have for you now. And I guess one of the things that troubles me is, how do we not know what I'm about to present? How do we not know that Kentucky had the 8th worst labor force participation rate in the country, and that now it's the 3rd worst labor participation rate in the country? How do we not know that? That would be my first question. And so my second recommendation goes to the recommendations that were in that 2015 report. How do we as Kentuckians asset map the data so that we can then put forth in a dashboard that you all see how we're investing in the efficacy of the investments we're making in talent development? How do we have true numbers to talk about how many people in the job-seeking system need childcare and transportation? Because there's enough data where you could use GIS to geomap where people are, what their skills are, and then help identify employers that can employ them. But it really all gets back to the data. For our regional workforce boards, in my view, as a country, we created these regional workforce boards across the whole United States, and their job was to balance supply and demand. You have a one-stop, and that was meant to serve both employers and job seekers, any job seeker, professional or otherwise. But when we engaged those groups, what we found is they often didn't have the data about how many needed childcare and these other things. So how do you really convene a solution in the absence of data? And so the second recommendation is, while we're implementing the first, and we have an eye towards developing a competitive advantage in talent, how do we create a true partnership between government and the functions that have tax dollars, like the one-stop system and others, along with business and along with citizens? How do we continue to make that better? How do we continuously improve that and have a dashboard so that we all know the numbers, so that we're not having to ask, we're not having to use anecdotal information to make decisions that could affect millions of dollars? And again, at the time, the conversation was that there was about $1 billion being spent annually in Kentucky. And so that's the second recommendation, is to asset map and then build a dashboard that our local elected leaders as well as our state leaders could see the top issues like labor force participation rate. And so let's talk about what that might look like. Let's say that we decided as a Commonwealth for the state and locals to collaborate, and we were going to have a concerted effort to move Kentucky just to be average. So I would prefer for us to be exceptional, but just, let's say we agreed to be average, so as to move us to 3rd to the middle of all the states. That would mean we had over 103 more people employed in Kentucky, 103,000 more people. That's what that would mean, just getting to average. Again, I would prefer to be top 3 best in the country, because clearly people are people at some level. How do some states far outpace us? How could we possibly, with the amazing Kentuckians we have, how could we possibly be 3rd worst and not even know it? And so to me, we owe it to the businesses, we owe it to the Kentuckians to help move these needles. But like my colleagues said before me, there's no one silver bullet in all of this. It's a variety of different both policies and strategies, but they all, in my opinion, should be based in data. So that was my perspective, Mr. Chair, but I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any members have? Co-Chair Schroeder.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. Thank you for the presentation. Going back to what you originally started with, looking at workforce development / talent attraction, Louisiana, Alabama, were the examples you gave. Could you dive into a little bit more how those positions, are they appointed by the governor, or is there some kind of, are they insulated from like political change?
Yeah, I think each state, yes, sir. Thank you for the question. I got my start in South Carolina, so that's probably the longest lasting. I think they've been doing it for 50 plus years, making that commitment. In that instance, it was co-located on a community college campus, but it was a separate entity. So I think each state does its best to create some insulation, but to develop it in a place where you can keep a culture of a sales, of a chase, close kind of mentality versus getting into maybe the credit hour kind of perspective. Because it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be, we're going to recruit them, we're going to screen them, we're going to train them and place them. It's more of a fast-paced, because again, the faster we fill those jobs, the faster you get the reverberation of the other 2.5 jobs in the state economy.
I'm sorry. So I mean, like the head person we're recruiting. Like, are they? I guess my thought is, if they know a new governor's coming in, why would I move to Kentucky if I could be out of a job in 2 years or something like that? I just didn't know if our mutual friend Lee up in Northern Kentucky, who came from Jobs Ready Ohio, talks about how that's kind of removed from, I think it's a quasi-governmental agency in Ohio, but has its own.
In each state is a little different. Like the South Carolina model as well as Louisiana model, but it's a public entity, and they compensate an individual, and how they compensated that individual and how they gave them the security that he or she might need is, I guess, handled in each state. But if you had a public-private partnership, I mean, there's obviously ways to structure that, but that's a good consideration, I would say, because again, in my view, given the amount of people it could benefit and the amount of business, finding that top coach to take that role would be awesome. It would be transformative, in my opinion. Yes, sir.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. As a member of the Majority Caucus, I can tell you that labor force participation rate, we discuss this often. Our very astute analyst, who happens to be with us today, she keeps us abreast on these, and we're so grateful for the data that she provides us. So some of us are talking about that on a regular basis. I'm wondering about your first recommendation about the talent group. The Kentucky Chamber does have the talent pipeline that was put into place 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. Is there any way they can kind of take over that role? Can they serve? Kentucky might get something like that implemented, or are there major differences? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. I guess my opinion would be that you would want to co-locate it with the Cabinet for Economic Development, who is doing the recruitment, and that recruitment is often bound by an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. So that would be my recommendation, to not co-locate it with the Kentucky Chamber. I think what Kentucky Chamber doing, and my COO was one of the first ones certified in TPM, is more the long term. I think there's a good partnership between the public workforce system and what Kentucky Chamber is doing, but I think this would be best serve Kentucky as a separate function. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, so I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the other group. You kind of anticipated that, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
So fewer than 10% have the skills necessary for the jobs. What are the skills or characteristics that are lacking?
I think if you look at what DOL has put out some time ago, the skills pyramid, I would call it, you have a lot of interpersonal skills at the foundational element. In Bowling Green and Warren County, we've actually taken 7 habits and we've fleshed that out. We've got a whole K through 12 comprehensive system that takes ethics-based leadership and then increasingly stacks upon it the hard skills. So I think my colleagues at CAM highlighted some of the leadership skills, soft skills, but the reality is employers are looking for people that can do things. So measurably, what nationally portable credentials do you have in all sectors? And kind of sort of to tie that in a bow, in that Kentucky Chamber report that was presented for their retreat, it showed a pie chart in there, and in that pie chart it showed that, and again, this is their data, 18% of employment requires a bachelor's degree. 2% of employment requires a master's degree. 3% of employment requires a PhD. So the growth in the time that I've been doing economic development has actually been positions in all sectors that require a high school degree and some college, typically certificates and other stuff. And I think the better we can align with the data, both in soft skills, leadership skills, and others, but the hard skills, I think matching that talent supply chain up region by region is the critical function. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Beckler.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Yes, sir.
I'll try and get out from behind them. And actually, this is my favorite spot. To implement a program that you're describing, do you have an estimate on what it might cost to start up and continuing cost? And would you expect that the fund for that to come directly from the General Assembly?
Thank you, sir, for the question. I think it's a great question. I'll step back for a moment if I could. In Florida, where I was before I came here, we had legislation passed that looked at not just the fiscal impact, but the return on investment. And that differential made a huge difference in how the state evaluated investments versus expenses. In my opinion, you would have an investment in this program. It would have a dollar number, whether that's 10 million or 15. I don't have a specific number, but I'm 100% confident that the return of that would be much larger. So the number would really relate to the scale that the Commonwealth wanted to implement and how you want to phase in, because it's a startup like any other business. But yes, I think the General Assembly should find funds, and you may be able to repurpose some funds you currently have, because there's a couple dollars out there to make that happen. But I did not have a specific ask in mind, because I think it needs to be a collaboration, because you can't just take the Louisiana model or the Alabama model or the South Carolina model. We need the Kentucky model that's going to beat the rest of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
And online from Bowling Green, Kentucky, Representative Sheldon.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, how are you doing, Ron?
Good, sir. How you doing?
Great presentation. I've had the pleasure of working beside you, Ron, for a number of years, way before politics, and we've seen this data begin to accumulate and actually be trending this way for a number of years now, and it's concerning, and we do need to address it. So, I guess rather than put you in a situation where I ask you a lot of questions that none of us know really the answers to yet, would it make sense to put together some type of task force or some kind of group here at in Frankfurt that you'd be willing to, as well as other executives across the state that would serve on, that would work with the cabinet to develop what I see as being, like you say, Kentucky's model. I know Virginia has just gotten a new model, if I remember right, and
yes, sir.
They kind of looked at Louisiana, and I want to think Texas as well.
Yes, sir.
So it seems to me, if I remember right, what I read is that they had put together some type. So, and we do that a lot here, and that's the first step, you know. So I would like to think maybe that'd be a next step kind of thing, rather than to start grabbing, you know, the low-hanging fruit all over the place, but maybe try to get some expertise together. What do you think?
Yes, sir. That's a great perspective. In meeting with Commerce, Lexington, Louisville Forward, Owensboro, Northern Kentucky, and myself, we've all offered to participate in any way the committee would want, whether it's talent development or an overall economic development plan for Kentucky, or an overall marketing plan for Kentucky. We'd be happy to lend our expertise as a group to a subcommittee. That would be awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And last question, if you mind, Chair. I'm sorry, Representative Weber.
You proceed.
I was thinking about that. You said you didn't think there was any statute or anything that kind of went on with it, along with this idea that you were aware of. Could we just research that and see if there was some statutory language or something that they used within their legislature, you know, to help move this along? If it's just the formation of a task force, we don't need that. But I mean, if there's something that would help create the structure, and maybe even something that you would lend some summary to the structure as well, to get back to maybe even me, and I can give it to the chairman, whatever.
Yes, sir. We can pull the language that started it in those different states.
Good deal.
We had a bill draft some years ago, but it was different than what I think would be a good fit now. Yes, sir.
Be great to get that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Ron, I want to thank you for coming today, presenting this idea to us. It's a good discussion. Some of the information that I've been looking over, for example, the Southwest, 5 states in the Southwest, they are adding at least 100,000 new manufacturing jobs in the last in 3 years, 2017 leading up to 2020. And that's because those states have taken the initiative to reach out. I know Arizona State, for example, offers an undergraduate program in engineering where they train engineers to meet those job demands and those needs out there. And so that's where 30% of our manufacturing jobs are being created in this country. And we're going to have to become a viable player.
Yes, sir.
In that market. And I appreciate you coming and sharing the thoughts that you had with today. I think you've given this committee some good food to digest and move forward on. So
Thank you, sir. Really do appreciate what you all do day in and day out to make Kentucky more competitive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, our next committee meeting will be held at the Kentucky State Fair, August 26th at 1 p.m. This committee will meet. We will be combining with the Tourism, Small Business, and Information Technology Committee will be meeting there. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And a second? We're adjourned.